like kind of softer and quieter. But then, yeah, I mean, occasionally, like, there's some wild Satan type shit that goes down, you know. But I feel like if you don't build that base of your characters, of people caring about your, you know, again, it goes back to what I was talking about with I like a hero in a horror story, because when it's just a bunch of random nameless people who go into a house and just start getting chopped up, who cares?
You don't care.
I don't care. If they're all gonna die and the bad guy is not gonna get away, or, you know, I mean, or he is, then why are we here? I mean, to me at least, I don't know.
Yeah.
So what makes a good hero for horror?
Someone who learns kung fu in their dreams and fights Freddy using kung fu in their dreams is my first example that I could go to. Yeah. No, I think that
Bruce Campbell.
Bruce Campbell is a great answer to that question. Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
If
Bruce,
you have to have a hero,
if you need someone on your side, Ash is the answer.
Actually, Peter Cushing might be my second choice.
Good one too.
I love Peter Cushing, but he is good as a villain in those Frankenstein films because he's nuts.
Yeah. I mean, you want, and this is just me speaking for the types of things that I enjoy. I take no pleasure from a character who has zero agency, who's just a victim the entire time. Certainly, there's like you want to do that at certain points, but you have to earn it. Like if there's a point in Baby Teeth where the main character Sadie, who's 16, if I've written a scene in which she is completely helpless and can't do anything about it, I want that. Like we're gonna build up to that for a long time, because I want you as the reader to feel as hopeless as she does, and then that's not gonna happen unless you get to know her and you know like what types of responses that she'll have to these things. So I don't really know if I'm answering your question really, but certainly chainsaw hands are fucking cool too. Yeah.
Paul, Evan, thoughts on either hero or what you see as keys to?
I think what Donnie said is it's the same rule for horror to some extent than it is for any story, right? If you don't care about the people in the fight, you don't care about the fight, right? So, so what are we doing? We're writing stories about people, and it's usually if you read it or you watch it or whatever, it's a mirror held up to you because you're reflected in the story, right? It's all about emotions and all that.
Yeah.
Those are universal to any kind of story. And recently I spoke on a panel and sort of gave a speech at this thing called Future X Live, which is about the future of storytelling in VR and AR, which we do at my studio a little bit. And the answer to what's the future of storytelling is the same as it's always ever been.
It's always been, yeah.
And that's kind of how we tell stories, right? What is it about horror that works? Well, first rule is going to be people, right? If you populated your story with people, and that's exactly what you mean by the hero. Like, if I don't care about anybody in this film because they're cannon fodder, then why am I going to sit there and watch it? I'm not going to stick with it for more than 5 minutes. So that's our primary job, is to make sure that we show the people. The theory on horror, I think what Evan said a little bit is actually, frankly, they're really tied into humor in many similar ways because they're extremes. I think you have to juxtapose this horrific stuff against something that gives you a break because it makes the horrific stuff even more effective. So you need a bit of humor and you need a bit of respite, right? You need that kind of stuff. And then finally, I mean, for me, I think it sort of depends on what your definition of horror is. So that's a whole new different question. But to some extent, I mean, I wrote, years ago, I wrote The Origin of Wolverine, and I remember getting to a point where I wrote a scene where this little dog, and I love animals, I got loads of them, they're all rescues, and I had to write that someone took a dog and cut its throat, and I didn't want to write it. I felt awful writing it. I felt like really drained after I'd finished it, and pretty sullen for a couple of days. So I was like, man, and I've thought to myself, actually, I learned something from that, which is that was a horror moment. That took me out of my comfort zone, and I had to write it. So it wasn't even tied to humor. So I think the definition to some extent of horror is taking people away from what they're comfortable with and letting them explore that a little bit. That's part of it.
I think that horror also, I mean, you're talking about the different styles of kind of interpreting the idea of horror, right? When you really look back at the history of comics and really kind of most art, most art is responding to whatever people are afraid of at the time, right? In the 30s and the 40s, you get things like Captain America and all these things because people were fucking terrified of the war, right? And then, you know, you start to get into the 60s and everyone's terrified of the nuclear bomb, and then all of a sudden everyone is getting their powers from, you know, like
giant insects
nuclear
in the
bombs,
50s,
and then everything. And so I think, and then you go into the 80s and you see reactions to things that people were terrified of.
The AIDS.
Like drugs. When they said crack is terrible,
and
you don't get the Dark Knight Returns without Reagan.
Well, vampires
You know?
also came back well during the AIDS epidemic, and I don't think that was.
That's not an accident. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that everything is at a certain point. I think think that you guys could both agree that when I'm writing something, it's staying in my head for a reason. Like because you know, I think as writers we all have a lot of ideas, but the ones that stick around for a reason. And for me, it's always unanswered things. It's things I need to think about. It's things I need to a road I need to go down.
And it's
to
usually the
explore.
worst roads.
Yeah, it's always the worst roads.
It's death, abandonment,
Well, God
madness.
There's a book that I wrote.
And we're all doomed.
Yeah. Yeah. I
mean, we're not going to get out of this. That's the sad thing.
God Country is a book I wrote after I had like a really profound health experience where I kind of almost died. I had an organ failure. Like I turned 30 and like just like almost instantly died. And so I'm okay now, so it's fine, right? But it was terrifying, right? And so I came out of that wanting to talk about death and everything, you know. And so I don't think, you know, I'm sure we've all had the experience as writers of you write something and then a few years go by and you go, oh shit, that's what I was writing about. That's what that was about. Holy shit.
And you wish you knew at the time because it probably would have been less therapy bills.
Honestly, that's why I don't read my stuff for like 2 years after it's published. I don't even look at it. I don't even think about it. And about 2 years go by. So if a new issue comes out, I don't touch it.
I mean, either.
2 years go by and then I look at it and I go, well, now I know what was happening.
Right.
Everything's autobiographical and
absolutely.
outlandish stuff. Yeah.
I mean, Baby Teeth is a book. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please, no.
I was just saying.
Joe's seen me steamroll people. I'm very happy to hear it. Yeah.
I feel like I'm getting like overly personal, like over and over again, but I don't mean to.
I'm about to in a minute,
okay,
so don't worry about it.
So like, you know, Baby Teeth is you know, while it's about the Antichrist, it's one of those things where I didn't even realize it until the book came out that there was like some like reviewers or something brought up a few points that I didn't know were in there. That I was like, oh wow, yeah, I guess that's there. Because my wife and I, we've been married for 6 years, but we've been together for like 14, and we recently discovered that it's going to be, if we wanted to have kids, it's going to be like really, really, really hard. So that was kind of a bummer and a shock. And then all of a sudden, I just happened to start writing a story about a 16-year-old girl giving birth to a baby and it destroying her world, and like writing about baby and mom stuff. Like shocking, you know.
If anyone's read Beasts of Burden, it's about animals. So I find it very difficult to write because Beasts of Burden wasn't supposed to be a series. It was an 8-page story. I wasn't supposed to be writing horror. And I write dairy products that hit people and dumb stuff like that. So people are like, well, you know, I remember I tried to write a Predator series for Dark Horse many years ago, and the editor said, I said, can I write one? And they said, you know, it can't be funny. So it took me a long time to start writing the other genre that I really like. And the weird thing that happened was Beast was an 8-page story and for a Dark Horse book of hauntings. And I knew that I love haunted house stories. Scott Alley knew that I loved horror stuff, and he'd always been trying to get me to do something. And so I thought, I'll do a haunted dollhouse, not knowing the M.R. James story or probably the million other ones. I couldn't make it work. So I haunted doghouse, you know, high concept. You've got 8 pages. So it ends up being a kind of Watership Down Exorcist thing. I realized that's where it's heading. And the characters, as they were talking about, I love supporting characters who show up. And in old comics, Marv Wolfman was good at this, Stephen King's good at this, there's a lot of people. If a guy is, in old movies, if the guy's a soda jerk or something, you can sort of remember how interesting he was. He has a thing.
Yeah.
The woman, the cigarette girl is interesting. Either there's something visual or there's something about their character. No one is boring. Nobody just, Franklin Pangborn is always at the hotel and does a weird bit of business. I want every page to count, every panel to count, every character to have some sort of, as if they leave the stage, they have a life.
Right.
But so these characters, I tried to make all 8 of them really interesting, even though you're only going to be with them for 8 pages. And Jill Thompson and I did the story, and people liked it. We ended up doing another one, and we did it for each subject. By the 3rd one, we realized we kind of were developing a world. But the problem was we have these animals, and animals fight dirty. And even though this was a storybook kind of approach to this, there's death and there's depression. Has anybody read it?
Yeah.
Okay, the thing about it is that what happened was we did the story Lost about the book. We did the story Lost in the miniseries, and that was my becoming a parent and fearful and free-floating anxiety about what would I feel if anything happened to my daughter. And it ended up becoming...
I got to interject, like, I've never been afraid of anything in my life. Like, I stand up to anything. Nothing really bothers me that much. Then I became a dad, and I would wake up in the middle of the night. This is your horror story.
Yep.
Right? I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I would wake my wife up and say, "Sweetheart, you know the intersection by Publix? Can you be really careful when you drive through there?"
Oh my God.
Because I love my kids so much, and it was killing me.
I sometimes feel like I would be getting in the car and going to Target or...
There's horror.
Because I
That's
do not
real
want
horror,
it. I don't want them out of my sight,
Yeah.
because but this plays into what happened in Beasts of Burden. We have several stories where Jill's cried on the page, and I have one page where there's a teardrop, and you can see where it hit the watercolor. And it's funny because Brian Arzarello is going like, "What did you do in the..." Because she's all like upset after a meeting we had with Scott, because there's a character that I know years from now what's going to happen to this character, and I broke down crying in my car.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, this is what should happen, but I don't want this to happen.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, have you ever, either of you ever planned a death of someone, and then when it came time to do
I don't.
it,
Well, Ace was supposed to die in the werewolf story.
Yeah,
and
and
everybody
you couldn't pull
yelled
the
at me,
trigger, or
and
what?
I could not pull the trigger. But I
Yeah.
made it as sad as possible. I wanted people to think this was what was coming.
Yeah.
That the black dog was over him, and that this was
Yeah.
it. And I look at the pages, and I'm like, there are times where I've written a story, and I don't want to. Jill's like, I don't want to. The story Lost is about a mother looking for her 2 children. It ends very badly. There is a kid who is doing what you talked about with your dog. He's collecting trophies. He's a future serial killer. He gets his, but the story doesn't end well. And the last page was very hard to write. I thought it was a beautiful scene. I was thinking about Shelley Winter's dead body in what's the, God, I'm blanking. Sorry, the Charles Lawton film that he made with Bob Mitchum, Love and Hate. Night of the Hunter. There's an amazing scene where her body is floating in the water. It's beautiful, and it's sad and terrifying. And that was the image we had for the pond where the boy was weighting down all the animals and throwing their skulls. And it ends on a weirdly happy note, but it's one that a lot of people stopped reading the book after that.
You know, one thing I wanted to just...
That was my fear.
Yeah.
That was my fear. And real quick, the issue that we just did last year, that's about bad parenting. It's the flip side. It's about my mother. It's about myself. It's about somebody who should not have had kids. And the Dimphna character is going to have to really work, I think, to get into some people's hearts again, because it was about people being raised wrong and raising other people wrong. It was about people who are living and growing. But a lot of the parenting and that issue got so bad that my wife had to co-write it with me, because I could not. I was dredging up stuff about my own life, about my own. And yeah,
Well,
yeah.
what I was going to bring up
That
is,
makes good horror, I think.
What I was going to bring up is that I don't know if this is the same for you guys. I'm just about to go ask him a question.
No, please, this is
I
good.
don't know how it is for you guys, but when I am writing effective horror, it's because I'm in a good mind frame, so I can deal with it. And if I'm stressed out or going through something really hard, I find humor much easier to write. I can do that like
I
that.
agree
I
with
love
you.
doing
Yeah.
humor.
I think I agree.
But I need to be able to kind of take a breath and gird my loins and be able to write the horror. So I can only do it when I'm in a good place. And I don't think my horror is very effective if I'm struggling or stressed out or anything like that. Then I'm like, I don't have the mental energy to put into this thing. So you got to be like in a good place.
Writing, like I'm writing a book right now that hasn't been announced yet, but it is just far and away the most incredibly dark thing I've ever written. It's brutal to the point where every issue that I write, I put on a specific song, I try and find like a mostly like symphonic stuff because I can't write with like words and everything. And
Let me hook you up. I've got a bunch of stuff for you.
okay, cool. And I like to always embed it in the script itself so the artist can kind of share my
That's nice.
headspace. I don't know if it's ever worked or if they've ever even opened the hyperlink.
I do sound. I can't do that because I'm cute, but I do soundtrack my stuff. I've got a horror playlist. I've got a happy ending playlist, sad ending playlist, and then I've got Laurie Anderson from when I have to stay up all night and keep drawing.
This new book I'm writing though
Classical.
is I struggled so hard to find music to attach to it because this will all make a lot of sense after next month when it's announced what this thing I'm doing is. But the character that I'm writing is such a dark character that he is in and of himself antithetical to the idea of art or like symphonies or anything. And so I had to find just
Radiohead.
Did you find it? What'd you find?
I found like old tuned down where it's barely audible Gregorian chants. So it's just like whoa.
That stuff drives me crazy.
It's just that, right? And so I just listened to that all day.
That's
and
like John Cage medieval music.
dude, and my wife will come home and she'll know when I'm writing that book that day because she'll come in and she'll be like, "Hey honey, I'm home." And I'm like, "Yes." Yes. And she's like, "Oh, you're doing that one. Okay." Like that one has given me legit nightmares. Like I've gone to bed at night and like that character followed me into my dreams and I was not okay with it.
That's usually the best work though. I mean,
I love it.
what I mean?
I love it. I've like tapped into this there's something quite, it's as visceral of a feeling of writing a scene in which a character wins and like everything comes, perfectly, like a plan comes, that it's as fun.
I've dreamt of a plan coming together in the end.
The other way sometimes to go the other way and just outright just like take out all your anger and all the things that piss you off and just like take it out on people in this book. Mm-hmm. The book Redneck I do. If any of you have read it, I wrote this essay kind of thing in the back of issue 2 because issue 2 came out, but I'm writing currently, I just turned in issue 16, so I'm like crazy far ahead. And so I wrote this thing in the back explaining to them, I printed a picture of my cat, and I explained to them that, hey, just a heads up, my cat just died. And you might not think that's very pertinent, but my cat was sitting in my lap while I wrote the issue that you just read, and she died in between issues 13 and 14. So I want you to keep that in mind for when you read issues 14. If things start to get wildly out of control and really fucking dark, know that those characters are being harmed in part by a small little cat that is no longer here. Like I just took it all out on this book. It's, I don't know, it can be cathartic to be
weird. It's
brutal.
funny what Paul said about the mood, because the issue that we turned, the issue of Beasts of Burden that we turned in, that my wife had to help me with because it was getting too much into my childhood and a lot of things that were upsetting me. It was supposed to be a comedy. The whole issue was supposed to be a comedy. It was plotted years, like several years. We have a lot of lag time between issues when Jill gets them done. And it was supposed to be a Lovecraft parody of just old tropes, kind of, I guess, more Derleth, because Derleth was a parody. I don't think he knew it, but and it somehow went from a comedy about demons and all that blah 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 talk to a, parenting issues, terrible ending comic. And I wonder if it's because my frame shifted so much during it that I could not shift gears. And
Well,
it on the page just got worse and worse.
I think part of it is like, and then we'll
No,
answer
no,
the
no,
questions,
no,
but
please,
it's kind
please.
of fun. Like, part of it is this: like, if you think about like what's actually horrifying to any of us as human beings, it's not really seeing Bruce Campbell smash up evil dead people.
No.
Like, it's sort of like, it's viscera and crazy blood and that, and we go, yeah, that's kind of funny, right? What's terrifying to us is situations, and so I remember when I wrote Hellblazer, one of my favorite issues that I had written was about a guy who I actually met, and he was at Dunkirk, and he walked in and out with the tide trying to keep his rifle dry, and they shot half his hand off. So he spent 3 days trying to walk in and out with the tide and trying to survive, and he lost blood, and he was so tired walking in these sandbanks that he was about to fall over and go to sleep, and somebody fished him out of the water. But what was horrifying about that story was actually what was going through his head. He had a girl that he loved in Britain, and he thought, I'll survive for her, and I'll see her when I come back. This is in the story now, and when he gets home, he finds that she's gone off with someone else. So the horror wasn't whether or not, and so in the end, he haunts her, and he has all this kind of stuff going on, but the horrific idea that you would be surviving just because of someone that you love, and you're ready to go, and then you get every part of your world collapses, that to me is horror, right? That's horrific.
The horror stuff that we think of.
But the crazy shootings.
It's the stuff that we like to have on a T-shirt or a model figure of it. But really, it's the anxieties.
Yeah.
It's the social stuff, and it's what's eating away at you at the time that you created it. That it's not getting chased by anything.
No. So I wanted to say that the other part of it was that when I was doing Hellblazer, my wife actually, when I met her, she's like, "You're really nice. Why do you write this crazy stuff?" And I said, "I'll read this one." So I had this one issue of Hellblazer that was totally somewhat a joke, and it was about a bulimic gymnast. Because I had read
hilarious.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't the joke. Yeah. But I had read a Sports Illustrated article about how gymnasts were being abused by their parents and being told, like, "You're fat, stick your stomach like tiny." So they would get really bulimic, and then they would try to tumble, and their bones would be brittle, and it would break their bones, and some girl had died. And I was really annoyed about that. I wanted to write about it, so I put it in the book. And in my book, the bulimic gymnast gets filled with the soul of Bacchus, kills the father, and then eats him because the Bacchus cannibalized their victims. And then because she doesn't want to be fat, she
that sounds great.
Throws on the father. My wife read it, and she's like horrified, like, "What? How did you think of this?" And I'm like, "Oh, I thought of it. I watch you while you're sleeping." And she's like, "Ah!" But it's
that's romantic.
But you got the horror of that story has nothing to do with the chewing and the Bacchus and all of that. It's everything to do with how awful it is to watch a young girl be mistreated so badly in a public environment, and that's the horror of it. So we got to pick into it, you know.
Have you ever been, either of you, have you ever been pulled back from an editor, or someone says, maybe this is a little bit, because I have. I went way too hard on an issue one time. And
I can remember doing Hellblazer, and I had the craziest part, this was a true scene. This literally happened to me. So I was on a train from Massachusetts down to New York, and I had a T-shirt on that says, "I like the Pope smokes dope." And,
I remember
and it's a picture
shirt.
of John Paul, and he had a joint in his hand, and he was like laughing, but they had airbrushed like the joint in the... And I ended up sitting across from a couple of nuns, and they were just staring at me, and I was like, "What? Oh, shit." And I put it in the book, and my editor said, "No way, no way," and changed it to the character having a no coat hangers sign about abortion and that, which I thought was 50 times worse.
That's so much worse.
50 times worse.
DC's always been a weird company that way.
It's so weird.
Marvel,
so much
when I was
worse.
working at Marvel wasn't even paying attention, so I was just putting band names on everything, and now they're like, we get sued for half of this stuff. DC's always like, they were so afraid a retailer somewhere in Wisconsin was going to get upset that they would just go out of their minds. But I don't think I've been, lucky or not lucky, because I'm usually off on my own.
Right.
Nobody from Deadline was going to tell me anything, and you know, I'm either doing kids' books where I really know the limits, you know, or I'm doing something where I'm just allowed to burn down Trump Tower like Milk and Cheese did many years ago, and God, do I wish they really did it. And yeah, I mean, so I don't have too many problems with that. Actually, when I was working on Predator stuff, I had because they still were jittery. It was very early.
Licensed stuff.
So character, but it wasn't 20th Century Fox. It was Dark Horse was afraid of language and I'm pleading with Chris Warner, and he agreed with me. It wasn't Chris. Chris, if you've met Chris, it wasn't Chris. Yeah. And Chris, I was like, if you see your best friend's head hanging as it's a jock strap for a Predator, you're not going to say, "Oh darn," "Oh damn," "Oh heck." I'm like, you're going to start, fouling up the air.
Yeah.
But I can show the head hanging.
But you can't
3 of
say
them.
that- have
But
one
I
say
can't say.
that.
Oh, I can't have a strong reaction to this horrific act of violence. But that was about it. Otherwise, it's just kick, burn babies,
Right.
set them on fire,
Yeah.
push them in the carts for a laugh.
Well, I in an issue of Redneck, for those of you who haven't read it, spoiler alert for the first issue.
There's violence.
There's some shit goes down. One of their own. It's about a family of vampires who live in East Texas, and they try to live like a peaceful life, but it doesn't go well. One of their own, their youngest, they're the smallest boy. They wake up the next morning after some shit goes down, and he's hung from a tree, and he's on fire. He's dead, right? And so I thought that was pretty fucked up. Because we set a little boy on fire, right? And so the next issue was supposed to be an appropriate response to such a thing, where the boys of the family go into town and just start murdering everyone. Because I really wanted to do, my thinking was, I wanted to do this thing where, because we follow the Bowman family, which are these vampires, and I wanted the audience to really like them and to kind of be on their side. And then like feel with them and like feel about them the way you would about a family, but then quickly in issue 2 remind the audience that like, oh yeah, no, they're fucking monsters. Like they're like a pack of lions, and like they're gonna go do some heinous stuff. So they can't go into churches, right? Because it's like hallowed ground. So they just like filled a truck up with gasoline and just like drove it into it and like jumped out of it and exploded it and like let everybody burn in the church. And then they found out where this dude was, and he was in a hospital, and they just were like walking in the hallways of this like ER room, just like murdering people with shotguns, like just like walking down the hall.
I think
just
that's
like,
the GOP health plan.
just going ballistic. And then they like find this guy and he's in surgery, and they like rip all these tubes out of him and shit.
Yes, it is the GOP health
and and my editor was like, dude, this is they were like, your audience, like his point was like, your audience is not gonna root for these 2 characters anymore. Like they're not gonna like these 2 characters. And I was like, yeah, totally. That's what I want. I want the audience to like be in a weird headspace where they're like, I just liked these characters, but now, oh fuck, like they're monsters.
It's good tension, though. I mean, and I don't think it's a problem, because these people are playing, Grand Theft Auto and stuff.
Right.
But everybody is really nervous. They're spending some money, and it's usually somebody else's money.
But to their point, it ended up being a good note, because it's something that I ended up taming it down.
You took out a few shotgun blasts?
I took out a lot, because when that eventually does happen, it's a good moment, but we need to earn it more than like dropping it in like the 3rd issue. We needed to earn it more. So I definitely got backed off on that one.
Questions from the audience?
I think you have to earn a lot in horror. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying earlier, I mean, if you do not care, I mean, audiences will get off on a Saw and things like that. And I remember going to horror movies in the 80s every week, and like everybody else, pumping my fists and cheering whenever somebody got split open, whatever. It was sort of a joke. But the movies that matter,
right?
Are the ones where even if they're as gross and over the top, but if you really want this person to get through, and they don't always have to live. I mean, a lot of horror is about not letting society rebuild and not letting your fears be alleviated. I mean, or there's always some element of it where you can even win, like in Shadow of Innsmouth, where you can win and lose at the same time.
Well, my favorite horror film is the Rob Zombie one, the sequel to The House of a Thousand Corpses. Help me out. The Devil's Rejects is amazing, because the band of like serial murderer family are the heroes. Like they're a bunch of like outlaws, and you find yourself rooting for them because the cops are after them, and it's like a Wild West like outlaw thing. And like it's this fun game that it plays, where as it goes along, you find yourself being like, oh no, wait, no, they should definitely get caught. So these are fucking terrible people.
Is it more like horror Because the truth is that, like, aren't you horrified when you watch a movie like that and you're like, I kind of like those guys?
Yeah.
Well, if you've
What does
seen,
that say about me,
what does it say
right?
about me?
That's
Donnie,
horrific.
you've seen Near Dark, right?
Yeah, oh, God,
That's
Dark is amazing.
that's a nice balance of I'm attracted and repelled by these
Yes,
characters.
100%.
They're the funniest characters. They're a clan. I hate the people that you're dealing with, but they're awful.
Yeah.
Well, this is the whole also thing is the crime film. I mean, the crime film is a really weird
Yeah,
thing
it's your
because
Tony Sopranos and
you're watching a movie where these people are doing horrible things, but you are spending all that time with them. So if you're watching even the original Scarface, you are rooting for your protagonist, knowing that they're a villain because you're involved with the outcome, and you're spending the hour and a half with this person. Sometimes you even you're watching somebody you hate, and if you spend enough time with them, you become
invested.
protective of them and
Which,
invested.
by the way, goes
You
back to what I
in-
said. Sorry, I was going to say, it goes back to that thing about being outside your comfort zone,
Yeah.
right? Like, you think about The Sopranos, think about that scene where
Yeah.
they chase someone down through a forest, and the guy's pissing and moaning because he's getting a poison ivy.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's somewhat funny, but at the end result is someone getting capped.
Yeah, Goodfellas has a lot of good
How
moments like
awful
that.
are we to laugh at that? But
Yeah.
then that's great.
Paul, you did. I mean, Constantine. I mean, Constantine is a character that you categorically should not like.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
he is not a good dude at all.
But you're
And,
attracted to him.
But
I
you
mean,
love him because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and you're waiting to see how he can get away with it. He's the Walter White of the DC world, and like
Such a good character. Like,
he's the
I
best
wish he was-
character of
yeah,
all
such a
time.
great
I
character.
love him so much, and I wish the firewall was still up at Vertigo, so that they
Yeah,
could
right.
keep him as a heroin addict and a complete asshole instead of having him run around with Scooby Doo.
Well, that's what
going on right now.
Snapper Carr now has that role.
Well, just
I didn't mean to
Constantine
derail.
is not the character that you put on the SpaghettiOs cans.
Can we get back to the questions?
he's
I'm
a-
sorry I
Sorry.
derailed.
No, yeah, go ahead. I can talk
Sir,
about
right here.
Constantine
Yeah,
all
we'll
fucking
talk.
day.
Come on, sit over.
Question: Are there any media you think are there any types of media that you think are underutilized for horror? Because for instance, I think that animation is underutilized for horror storytelling.
But wouldn't you say, like, if it lends itself to a medium, then it works, right? And if it doesn't lend itself to a medium very easily, then it probably doesn't work as well, right? So, animation, sure, there's no medium that you couldn't do horror in.
I think video games are really good at it.
Yeah, games are good.
Yeah.
In fact, I've had a lot of experience working on games, and some of the stuff that we tried to do in, like, The Darkness, right? That was a great horror game, and it worked out. We did 2 of them. And in a movie, you say, don't go in there. In a video game, you have to go in there.
You have to
So
go in
it's
there.
a completely
Yeah.
different feeling.
Yeah, that's
right?
great.
So
Yeah.
there's loads of things that you can do in games. I don't think there's actually an answer to that, because why is it that animation hasn't done a lot of horror? Well, I think it's probably
business.
self-evident. Right?
That's
it's
a
a
bit.
business
I don't think
thing,
it's
yeah.
it's not the medium. It's the business.
Yeah.
I mean, look
like
at how hard it's
comics.
been to make the Goon into a.
Well, Japan, which embraces animation differently than the American audiences have,
Yeah.
there are a decent amount of horror movies. Excuse me.
We're seeing with the Goon.
Oh no, I was just saying that the Goon. It's been so hard for them to get that.
It's
film
hard
off
for
the
them
ground
to
because
make-
it's like a horror. It's a rated R.
It's hard for them to make an R-rated comedy.
Yeah.
Animation film.
And
Animation
animated,
is still
yeah.
seen as a child's medium, a
Right.
kid's medium. That's why you still have songs in most of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to launch that stuff, which is why some of the weird animations being done for cable and whatnot.
Yeah.
Animation's a really safety net. I mean, I've done some animation writing for television, and that it's a weird safety net. Producers get super nervous about anything. Animation is a perfect medium for horror. People aren't backing it. You'll see horror animation on the web, and it'll probably become just like comics. Comics are cheaper to make, so that people can afford to take chances. With animation, it's an incredibly expensive endeavor with a lot of fingers and a lot of different people's wallets in it. And that's why you're not seeing musical comedies, that are not about princesses. And you're not seeing much adventure R-rated. That's starting to break down a little bit from
Yeah.
some foreign films that are coming in, something like The Goon. But it's going to be years before there are regular R-rated movies of any kind in animation. It's just not. It's the business. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
the medium.
weird. They get gun shy about it.
Yeah, nobody will put money into it.
Yeah.
Questions?
Do you think that from our current situation, do you think horror is kind of rise back up again? Because I know, like,
Oh, because everyone's fucking terrified right now. Yeah.
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 there's a spike in horror.
Totally.
It seems like
The 80s, you
Yeah.
had Reagan,
Yeah,
way
of
crazy
course,
movies.
yeah.
I think horror's never going away. Also,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much material out right these days.
I don't want to, like, you don't sort of like talk about future projects that you're doing too much, because then you're kind of just giving the game away. But I got to be honest with you, like, I'm working on a project right now that we're about to do, and it's all about two tribes tearing the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
Why? Because we see it every day, and every day.
Oh yeah,
it's just.
I'm doing a book it's a 100% response.
It's gonna
to
come
the-
into
I mean,
everybody's
The zeitgeist. It's going to
always-
come into
Yeah.
things that aren't
Well, what's
even
cool about-
designed to be like that.
What's
yeah.
cool about the production of comics is that they're all made so far out, so that like this summer you'll start to see the reactionary books to some shit that went down last year.
Yeah.
You can always kind of time it out. It's always about 6 months where those comics start to.
The thing is to try to
drop.
not make it dated, so that
Yeah.
15 years from now, people are going to
Totally.
go, "Well, funny haircuts."
Sure, but you say that, but like Dark Knight
Daredevil.
Returns just straight up had Reagan in it.
Well,
just like
we could have an argument about that at the bar. So I'm not a huge fan.
I made the mistake of writing the word MySpace in one of my comic books
Oh,
one
no.
time years ago, and no one has forgotten about it.
Oh.
You're right about MySpace. I realize it's not relevant now.
Yeah.
I get it.
It is nice though, digital lettering. You can
Yeah,
you can
yank some
sometimes go
stuff
back
out.
in there
Yeah.
and get rid of that stuff. I did a comic for MySpace. I think I was one of the few who made
Oh,
money off of that.
when it was the Dark Horse Presents thing. Yeah.
I'm in a lot of lost causes
Questions?
besides comics.
Right here.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to evoke particular reactions from a reader, and so I've come to a point where I'm trying to distinguish between what how do I put this? There are different kinds of fear that you can invoke in an audience. Like there's like an ambiguous kind of fear, like if kind of don't go in the basement kind of
Mhm.
don't know what's going to happen, versus like Michael Myers is right around the corner. And so like one is like the reader can fear a very specific outcome, or just feel kind of freaked out by a situation.
Visceral,
Yeah, versus,
it's
like,
kind of like
implied.
showing or inferring is what
Yeah.
Jill and I.
Would be good to use those particular situations.
Depends on the script.
Yeah,
I would think.
it depends on really. I think it's what we've been talking about
the
is
effect you want.
found the base of the characters or the people that it's happening to. You know, if you like, how do I explain this? Like, it's a very different reaction where if you have. I'm trying to think of a great way to say this. Okay, if you had a scene where Lois Lane is terrified of something, and then you have a scene where Superman is terrified of something, but you don't see what they're terrified of, just based on who those two people are, those are two very different things that they're scared of, right? Lois, it could be anything, right? To scare the shit out of Superman, you're dealing with a whole other thing. So it's probably a bad example, but does anybody know what I'm saying?
It's a good example, yeah.
It starts with the same thing that every story starts with, which is just character, and then how that character reacts is how your audience will react. Does that make sense?
One specific thing I could add is that I find Jill actually doesn't like to. She likes horror movies. She does not like to paint gore, especially when it's animals. Okay, and the funny thing is she paints the most beautiful gore. When she actually does, I like to actually nudge her out of her comfort zone. I don't do it I'm not playing games or being manipulative with my collaborator, with my co-creator, but I'm like, here's the thing, a door is opening up in Beasts of Burden, there's 4 dead dogs walking, trying to get in. It's a kind of Return of the Living Dead joke beat, and it's a shock beat, but the thing is, you've got to see the dead dogs. You don't want to infer the zombies. Zombies are never something that you generally infer. They're at you, they're gross, how much makeup you do,
Yeah.
whatever. The guts are out there. When there's a dead boy's collection of trinkets he's taken from the animals he's killed, and they're ripping his throat out, I felt, here's a moment where I could go cheap, and we could show the animals, if it was Lucio Fulci would have the, you'd have everything, and people would go right on. You don't see a thing.
Yeah.
I want your mind to take this weird scene, I want you to see the violence, and then look at the trophy closet, because there's a lot of details in there that on a second reading you will probably get. There's a thing that we call in the book, I call it Val Lewton, the Val Lewton moment, where you don't show the guy in the monster suit, because the monster suit's never going to be as scary. Even if it's a beautiful monster suit like the Alien suit. They don't show that alien as much as you think they do in that movie.
Yeah.
There's the cheat where you don't show the monster at all, like Blood Beach or something where they couldn't make it or shouldn't have made it. And then there's the, what is Superman looking at? What is going on here? Let the person's mind figure out what the unnameable is, because he will always be creepier than the drawing. You can draw as many tentacles and eyes, as much gore, you can have dead babies, everything that freaks you out, but it will not stay with you.
Yeah, and The Walking Dead, just really quick, because you touched on it, like this, if you read the book or you watch the show, like, you know that the scariest parts of that show are never the zombies. It's never the zombies. It's because it's
the enemy.
It's like The Walking Dead, like the title of the show or the comic book. It's not referring to the zombies. It's referring to the people, right? They are the Walking Dead, because they're all gonna fucking die, and you're gonna fall in love with all of them. And then a book like The Road by
Cormac McCarthy.
is horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And the two characters are a father and son who are they're never named. You don't know anything about them, but you're just following through, and from the first paragraph of the opening page that they are not walking to anywhere. Like, there's no salvation. Like, there's no light at the end of this tunnel, and the whole book is just just them crawling along trying to stay alive. But it's because you care about them. It's not about how scary the apocalypse is. It's how fucking terrifying it is to have a young son and trying to keep him alive during whatever that is, be it zombies or whatever,
And maybe one other thing that might help you a little bit is, I think a little bit of it is in timing, right?
Yeah.
So a good example of that would be in the Ring, the American version of The Ring. They actually did something that was halfway decent at the beginning of it, at least. They have a good scene where someone, like, as an audience, you're going into a horror film, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of know what the deal is. You're going to sit down, you're going to wait for the crazy little girl that you saw in the previews, so you kind of know where you're going. Well, at that point, they've already begun on you. So one of the first scenes in that movie is somebody going into a fridge, and the way that the camera is angled, there's a hallway beyond the fridge door. So once you've opened the fridge door, the hallway's blocked out, and we're sitting there going like, oh no, that little crazy little girl's going to be at the end of the hallway when she closes the fridge door. Or in fact, she hesitates at the fridge door for a second, and you're like, there's going to be a head in there.
Yeah, you're playing with the expectation.
So you're playing with this expectation, so it's all about timing, and she opens the door, she doesn't even look, and you're like, the moment she looks in the fridge, there's going to be a head.
Oh, horror films do that stuff all the time, and every single horror film, whenever someone goes into a room, they never close the door behind
Well, there's that really
them.
nice scene in the first Halloween where you've just got somebody doing their laundry, and she moves across the shot, and when she moves back, you can see Michael Myers in the background. And when she puts more laundry in there, he's gone.
Yeah.
That's
Unexpected.
That's terrifying,
It's being done,
yeah.
but Japanese horror movies are really good to watch for a balance of jump scares, shocks. I mean, not right now, it's in a bad place right now, but the aughts and the 80s are pretty good for that way, because sometimes you want a jump scare, and please earn it. God, do I hate the phone rings, or a cat gets thrown onto you. That thing is...
Well, no, hold on. The cat jumping out in Alien,
the cat, and you can see
is
the cat was thrown by some
amazing,
PA.
though. Yeah.
The cat is always pissed off.
The cat jump scare in Alien is one of my favorite things of all time. Just
Okay,
the fact that they had
Jonesy's
a cat on that
a character.
spaceship.
That's different. That's
Sure.
different. I mean, the Howling has a dog. Anyway, we could talk for hours. The thing is also, you got to say, the closest thing we have to a jump scare in comics is the page turn, or the scroll, and you can't really. This is most horror panels that I've listened to or been on. You can't really scare people. Not the way that you're going to make people scream.
Yeah.
And dates are going to read the comic together and huddle up to each other and go, "Oh my God, I know where he is." You do it on the page turn sometimes, like I don't know how to pronounce it, the Avunk. Or the Avunch. Alan Moore had an issue with Swamp Thing, which is a real thing. It's when it's in South America. It's fake. It's a cryptid type, urban legend. They raise a child, turn its head back, turn its body around, and this backwards man is running at your character in the subway. It's out of left field, which is exactly how it works. It's one of the few jump scares in comics that I just went, what the? And I've never forgotten it.
Yeah.
It's very. I mean. EC Comics only had so much room, so their jump scare is like in the last panel. So if you do what a lot of people do and scan the page, you're like, oh, she chopped them up. So
yeah.
the joke is, EC Comics are very good at that. In fact, the whole joke is the irony of, oh,
Right.
she badgered me all this time, I stuffed a badger in her mouth. Things like that. He was worried about money, I stuffed him full of money, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
She's henpecked, I'm henpecked, whatever. People stink. But you really can't scare. I think you can unnerve. The only comics that really affect me as scary, Charles Burns sometimes can really just build up what the hell is going on
He
in
can
this
make
world
you
is
feel
created.
unsettled
There's a lot of
very
people who do
well, yeah.
really good horror comics, but there's something about you don't know where it's coming from. Japanese Junji Ito. I love his stuff because one page it'll be gore and then it'll be some shadowy thing, and he's texture crazy, OCD, and they've made a lot of movies based on his stuff, and they're all terrible pretty much. But I would check out Uzumaki, and I would check out Gaio is just nuts. But movies, watch foreign movies because they have cliches that you don't know. This is for me. I don't know, but I love Hong Kong action movies. You start watching Thai action movies, Turkish action movies. I don't know about that, but you will see things you've never seen before because America has its cliches in horror, in comedy. Eventually, you'll get used to them. In Japan, long hair, or the fact that your main character will die a lot. There's a lot of sacrifice in Chinese, Korean. Kung fu, people will die and that's it. And you're supposed to feel happy even though, good one, but the village is burning. Takashi Miike, things like that. But that's not American cliches. We don't have the samurai code. We don't have the sacrifice. We have the Die Hard, shoot the whole building up and then walk away with music, which is fun on its own level. But when you watch other horror movies, Mexican, Italian, other years, you start to watch Val Lewton films if you want to. Curse of the Demon is a great one. In fact, there's two versions of Curse of the Demon. It's on a DVD. Well, true, because the filmmakers, the British filmmakers, put the monster in at the end on one version, and the other, you don't know if the person's crazy or not. You don't know if Dana Andrews. It's based on an M.R. James story, Casting the Ruins, which is awesome, and you don't know if these characters if it's like voodoo, is it working by psychology, or is there a monster? You can watch both versions and see which one's more effective. I think it's the one where they infer everything.
Yeah, usually.
Sometimes you don't know, and horror is a lot about not knowing. David Lynch and filmmakers like that, you're like, what the hell was that? It'll stay with Robert Blake in Lost Highway will stay with me forever. I don't even like the movie that much, but that is just nuts. And phone calls with yourself, just weird stuff that shouldn't happen, just stuff that's off kilter, that's just wrong. To me, is more horrifying. Loss of identity, madness, something is wrong, is cool. There's a movie called Pulse that I would recommend, Kiroshi Kurosawa. That's a movie that changes perceptions every 5-10 minutes. It's a bit like The Ring because they were going through the fear of technology stuff for a few years. My phone's haunted, my DVD's gonna get me, my pop-up, my microwave, my rice cooker. But this one's really crazy because it goes into Lovecraftian, goes into cosmic horror at the end, and at the end you're just going, I don't know what the hell I just saw. And there's scenes that are horrifying, and there's scenes, the scariest scene in there, you don't know what the hell you're looking at. It actually made everybody in a jokey room of beer drinking men and women go, back that shit up. We had the back shit up. Back that shit up is usually kung fu. It's usually back that shit up. I want to see the gorilla get its brains kicked out in the Bloody Apes. But we had to back it up 3 times because the first time it freaked us out so much that it was silent, and I have nightmares still over this. It's really well done. Sorry.
Well, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you guys, Paul, Donnie, Evan. Appreciate the time. I think Paul and Donnie, you're over at the Aftershock booth.
I'm going to be at the Heroes booth right
in
now.
like 15 minutes for
doing a signing for our Heroescon exclusive, so I'll be there.
Yep. And Evan, you're over at 1203. If folks want to see you over there.
Know. I'm by the we're by the Hernandez Brothers. I have a very wimpy small banner. It's smaller than everybody else's.
Well, thank you guys for the time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you all.